Elden Ring is probably my favorite game of all time. I say probably, however, because when I start thinking about the little idiosyncrasies of the game, my feelings go from overwhelmingly positive to overwhelmingly, conflicted. It's odd, and if I'm going to talk about the quality of this game, I need to be as upfront about my feelings as possible. So yeah, this video is going to be all over the place. I'll go from ragging on one mechanic to praising it to ragging on it again, all while proclaiming how much I love this game, and I do love this game, and I'm hoping that by creating this and putting it out into the world, I can help organize my thoughts into something more coherent. Now, as is customary with any YouTube review, this is all my opinion. I am not a game reviewer, I am not a popular YouTuber, and unlike VaatiVidya, my knowledge of the game is nowhere near encyclopedic. I'm simply someone who really likes the Souls games, and this review is absolutely not objective in any way. It is the first time I've ever reviewed anything. I'm hoping that maybe I could unearth some objective takes on the experience through my analysis of my own feelings on the game. But who knows? Maybe I'll just confuse myself more. So, let's get into it. When I first cracked open Elden Ring, I had already played and beaten a myriad of Souls titles, and I was distinctly aware of the Soulsborne series' status as my favorite game series of all time. Of course, I was privy to all the pre-release trailers, teasers, Vaati breakdown videos, and so on and so forth, and so by the time the game actually came into my grasp, I had already heard a ton of buzz about the quality of the game and how it was supposedly this legendary experience. I had this distinct memory of watching Donkey's review and noticing the fact that his only critique of the game was that
the difficulty in this game is best described as what is the word I'm looking for here? Total fucking horseshit.
Perfect. Despite having beaten Dark Souls 3, Ashes of Ariandel, The Ringed City, Bloodborne, The Old Hunters, and Sekiro, I would not call myself particularly great at these games. Rather, I have a ridiculous amount of patience and find myself largely unfazed when the first boss hammers my face into the dirt 50 plus times in a row. In fact, I relish in it. This is literally why I play these games. When I first heard of the series, it was through Game Theory's video on Dark Souls 3, way the hell back in 2017. There, I heard of the Nameless King, the legendary monster of a boss that few players had ever dared to go up against, and obviously I wanted to take the challenge. As a child, I was always fighting invisible ninjas and having imaginary battles against huge foes, and this was a perfect answer to those prayers. Fast forward to 2022, and I feel just about the same way. I want that insurmountable challenge in a video game. I want to get my face hammered to a bloody pulp, and I want to have that epic spellbinding battle with a massive foe. So when I picked up Elden Ring, what happened? As anyone who's ever picked up an action RPG knows, scaling is a hugely important aspect of the experience, and, of course, if the game is scaled in the player's favor, the game will be easier and vice versa. This is why, in most AAA RPGs, you have a difficulty slider to adjust how you want the game to feel. However, in a typical From Software fashion, Elden Ring does not stoop to such primitive levels, and neither does any other game in the canon. Sekiro is the most rigid with it, while the Soulsborne series is more fluid, though it still retains its general balance of difficulty, although I have been stuck on ONS for well over a year because I'm severely underleveled on Orlando, and if you don't unlock fast travel until after you beat them. However, Elden Ring is an open world game and goes to the Breath of the Wild school of game design. You open up a door and you can go wherever you want. Theoretically, if you're sneaky, you could go all the way up to the Tree Sentinel in Leyndell before you even fight a single enemy. However, meshing Breath of the Wild open world game design and Dark Souls character leveling and progression means that, without New Game Plus, things like this can happen. Of course, this is an extreme example, but it is something that happened to me multiple times on both of my playthroughs. Accidentally trivializing the game for yourself is something that is worryingly easy to do. Because, during my first playthrough, I melted Morgott in 8 hits with the Darkmoon Greatsword because I had just happened to complete Ronnie's questline before reaching him, and when the victory screen played, I felt like I had cheated. Morgott, as I would find out in my second playthrough, is one of the coolest and most engaging boss fights in the entire game, and I trivialized him with this weapon. Now, granted, I did go out of my way significantly to get the sword when I was given the opportunity, so I figured it was a fluke. However, on my second playthrough, using my Faith build, I got my hands on the Blasphemous Blade, completely annihilated Godfrey's Shade, and nearly did the same with Morgott before I made the conscious decision to sell it in exchange for something that would give me a more balanced experience. However, when I did this, I realized that I was essentially moving Elden Ring's quote-unquote difficulty slider, which is something that these games are not supposed to allow you to do. Going back to my first playthrough, as those of you who watched the video would know, I had an incredibly difficult time with the Godskin Noble in Volcano Manor. For me, that was the second hardest fight in the game after Millennia. It was an unbelievable challenge, but of course I did this before I finished Ronnie's questline. Fast forward to Faramazula, and I was ready to get my ass handed to me by the Godskin duo. I even had a recording going so I could make a little sequel video out of it, and I beat them in 3 tries. It was bizarre. By gaining this busted weapon and kind of over-leveling myself, I feel like I'd artificially taken from my experience. I feel like the Radahn fight is the best example of how Elden Ring handles its difficulty and scaling. There are really 3 ways you can approach this battle. 1, by going solo and staying on your horse, by going solo with no horse, and by going all in and summoning everyone, horse or no horse. Obviously, there are other variations to this little Punnett square that we just created, but I feel it's indicative of the whole game. When you run in with everyone, it feels incredibly cool, but then you defeat them in 6 tries, and you're left with this weird feeling of emptiness. Going in on your own, on the other hand, allows you to go toe-to-toe, and it's an equally cool, and for my money, a more rewarding experience. That being said, there is a sense of cheapness to your victory, because you could have always just gone the easy way out. There is a sense of this in the Souls games too with the summoning mechanic, but it's not as prevalent as it is in Elden Ring. Think about Sword Saint Ishin, the final boss of Sekiro. There are no shortcuts, no exploits, no ways around him. You've either mastered the mechanics of the game, or you're dead. Elden Ring does not do this. Hell, when I first fought Margit, I didn't even beat him legitimately. I summoned in the rotten stray ashes, inflicted him with Scarlet Rot, and then just ran away until he died. With so many different options of gameplay, you have more freedom of expression, yes, but also 100,000 ways to make the game easier for yourself. Breath of the Wild avoids this issue by giving you essentially everything you'll need right off the bat and then letting you go out into the world, and because of that, it's a far more balanced experience. However, I don't think this necessarily makes it a better experience. Elden Ring is ultimately a game about freedom, and even though I just spent 4 minutes ragging on the scaling, I feel like this trade-off is ultimately worth it. I've heard some people talk about the idea of helping Elden Ring's balancing by making it more of an open zone game where certain levels or areas are locked off until you're high enough level to get there, and with nothing in your given vicinity that would trivialize or cheapen the experience, like the Scarlet Rot debuff, for example. However, this would run counter to the entire point of Elden Ring and the fundamental purpose of why this game is so amazing. I am not joking when I say this game has a better open world than Breath of the Wild. I'm being serious. I love Breath of the Wild. When I played through it, I defeated all the divine beasts, and then I stalled on getting to Ganon as long as I possibly could. For 3 months, 3 actual human months, just because I didn't want it to end. Because I knew that after the credits rolled, I would never play it again, which is exactly what happened. With Elden Ring, the credits rolled, and I went, I'm gonna go beat that shit again. And within 20 minutes of my second playthrough, I discovered a cave that I had never seen before and fought a boss that I had never fought before. I was gobsmacked. In his Banjo and Kazooie video, Donkey talks about how a large open area with very little to do is much worse than a smaller area with a lot to do in it. Density is important, and we see this echoed throughout the Souls series. Lordran and Yharnam are perfectly vertical, winding in and out, backtracking through areas the player saw 15 hours ago, and giving you a shortcut back to the start of the game. It's magical. Elden Ring, despite its map being 50% larger than Providence, Rhode Island, is somehow more packed with stuff to do, and caves and quests and characters and enemies and bosses and items and craftables and spells and other spells and entire underground civilizations than any other Souls game before it. There is seemingly no end to the size of this game's map. When I did my first playthrough, I teleported to Raya Lucaria, and I was like, holy shit! This has got to be the top of the map. Turns out, I was only halfway through the region of Lemuria, let alone the entire map. Then, I discovered basically an entire second Limgrave to the south of Limgrave, and then I got teleported to the capital city, and I was like, holy shit! This has to be the top of the map. It was not, as I thought, the top of the map. I haven't even discussed Satan's house, or the Big Fat Jar, or the Poison Castle, or Melania's treehouse, or the secret underground area hidden behind the other secret underground area that you can only access by eating this hefty fellow, or the floating castle, or the capital city, which is probably the size of the entire map for Dark Souls 3. Elden Ring, to me, feels like going to New York and trying to hit every single restaurant in the entire city. It literally cannot be done. It is impossible. It is an impossible gauntlet, and that's what makes it so infinitely replayable. Freedom. This is at the heart of Elden Ring, and going all the way back to the scaling issue from the beginning, I don't think this was a mistake. Last year, Miyazaki gave an interview with PlayStation Blog in which he said, "As I mentioned, the player's level of freedom to progress through the world or return to a challenge later are all elements that I feel will help people get through the game at a more leisurely pace. Also, there isn't a focus on pure action. The player has more agency to decide their approach against, for example, the field bosses in the overworld and how they utilize stealth in various situations. We've even reduced the number of hoops that you have to jump through in order to enjoy it in multiplayer. So we hope the players embrace the idea of receiving help from others, and we feel like the overall clear rate will go up this time because of these things." If we go back to the Radahn fight from earlier, a lot of the weird idiosyncrasies from the fight start to add up. It's by design that you can approach the fight in multiple different ways, and despite how it makes the fight easier, riding into battle with your comrade to take down Radahn feels incredibly epic, like you're leading the charge in Lord of the Rings or Braveheart or something. In that sense, the overall aim of Elden Ring is not to unfairly punish the player to make it overly difficult, but rather to create an enjoyable experience that will resonate with the entire fan base. If you want your game to be reminiscent of the old Souls titles and come through with no help whatsoever, you have the agency to run into boss battles with no spirit ashes and a fairly balanced weapon. And if you want to feel incredibly badass, you also have the freedom to destroy Melania with Rivers of Blood and Mimic Tear. Or better yet, you could just summon Let Me Solo Her and watch them kick her ass. Every player can enjoy the game at their own pace. The value that comes from gawking at the Eternal City for the first time, or watching Godric rip off his own arm, or charging into battle to fight Radahn, or having your mind blown every time the map is expanded, are all going to be the same, and ultimately these moments of pure spectacle are really what matters. It's through the gameplay and the conscious choices of the player that the game can become easier or more difficult. And this is what makes Elden Ring's quote-unquote freedom of difficulty far more engaging than something like Skyrim or Minecraft, when you can just go into the settings and click a button. I had to work my ass off to get my hands on the Moonlight Greatsword. I had to basically kill Satan to be able to swing the Blasphemous Blade. The game rewards exploration with these overpowered and badass weapons, and in the process, you get much more out of the experience. Take Margit, the first real boss in the game. The game starts by pretty much directing you right into him with very little resistance along the way, giving players a bit of a shock when they remember, this game's really hard. Margit is set up as less of a learning tool and more of a blockade due to his abnormally high difficulty. Players are then given a choice. They can either ram their head into a brick wall until it breaks, like I did with the other Souls games, and just grind out Margit, or they can run out into the wildlands of Limgrave and the Weeping Peninsula to go level up and come back when they're more equipped to fight him. These first few hours exemplify the central theme of freedom within Elden Ring, but of course, do give you the opportunity to find a busted-ass weapon or skill and melt him with no difficulty. You can find the meteorite staff inside of Caelid, which, has an S scaling in intelligence. Now, of course, everything I said in the first part still holds true. For me, there is a sense of cheapness in using Spirit Ashes and obliterating a boss with a busted weapon, but the keywords here are "for me." By giving players this freedom of expression, you open up the possibility of completely melting a boss with an overpowered spell. And while part of me wishes you could negate this, I feel like interfering with the ability for players to explore and express themselves freely ultimately serves to undermine Miyazaki's vision. And it's a damn good vision. Despite its flaws and my complicated feelings about the objective quality of the scaling, no reasonable person can deny the beauty of Elden Ring. In both its environments, its dozens of dungeons, its hundreds of builds, the bosses, both big and small, and the story, intricately told by Miyazaki and Mr. Game of Thrones himself. I love this shit, man! It's a game that I literally mean fulfills my childhood dreams of the ideal game, and I cannot wait for the DLC. If they could just tweak with the scaling a little bit, I have a feeling it'll turn out to be an experience on par with the old Hunters. I'm not even kidding. We're just gonna have to wait and see. But Waterfowl does suck, by the way. Every player can enjoy the game at their own place.